Welcome, and thank you all again for joining us. I know we may have some people roll on in, but feel free to just come on in and join us for the webinar and, come along with us for this conversation today. So this webinar is changing the game with your contingent workforce program in 2024. My name is Riley Jackson, and I lead Primary Talent Partners Marketing and DEI initiatives. I'm really delighted to moderate this webinar with this group of game changers. It's been really awesome coming up to this point with them, and I'm excited for all that's in store today. We will do their introductions in just a second, but a couple of little housekeeping notes before we keep going. Our session is being recorded, so if you have a colleague or someone who couldn't make it today, we'd be happy to share it with them afterwards. Your microphones were muted upon entry, so if you have a question, we do have the live Q&A session at the end of the discussion, so feel free to put them in the chat or hold on to them, whatever feels best. But we will have a lot of time for that Q&A at the end, and we are just looking forward to exploring all the different options today. So with that out of the way, all the housekeeping and my introduction, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our panel to do some introductions of themselves. If you want to start for us, Amy.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and great to be here. My name is Amy Geiger, and I am the director of our contingent workforce program at Marriott International, referred to as Flex Talent Solutions. For me personally, I'm a boomerang to Marriott International. I studied hospitality in college and went to work for the Ritz-Carlton right out of school. Worked there on the property for about 4 or 5 years. Left and did a stint at a law firm for a little while and ran their conference center, and then moved into staffing. Was kind of tasked with doing team management and customer service, but really sort of found my niche when I got over into the supplier side. So I did 6 years on the supplier side. Our primary focus was independent contractor compliance, but also got to look at and work with a lot of different customer contingent workforce programs. Got to see high volume payroll, direct sourcing, DMS implementations, IC compliance, kind of ran the gamut. And that level of exposure really set me up for success when I got extremely lucky and saw that Marriott was hiring for their head of their contingent workforce program coming out of COVID. And so I joined Marriott again back in 2021 and was able to bring a lot of the large scale enterprise concepts that I had seen from other customers in my year on the supplier side to the buyer side. And so since I've joined Marriott, we are an internally managed program. It has a very long history. We can trace it all the way back to the 1970s when it was Marriott Temporary Services, where we had administrative assistants and secretaries ready to head up and help the executives if anybody called out sick. We have 2 different sides of our program. One is what we consider like our light industrial, out on the hotels at the properties, running in the thousands of headcount every single week. It's a big machine. And then we have our more traditional professional headquarters and offices based program. And we are a pretty big operation, but we are US only today, with a little bit of expansion into Canada and are setting our sights on some additional locations. So that's me in a nutshell. Thanks, Riley.
Thank you, Amy. Alan?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. First off, I want to thank Primary Talent Partners for hosting this webinar and inviting me to be a panel member. I'm Alan Chilson. I'm from Danaher Corporation. Danaher is a science and technology innovator that's the parent company to over 15 operating companies that work in the diagnostics, life sciences, and biotechnology industries. I'm the leader globally for talent acquisition vendor management, with my primary focus being to drive our strategy and continuous improvement efforts in using recruitment process outsourcing, master service provider, and direct hire search agency vendors around the world. Both the RPO and MSP programs currently support North America and EMEA, but we will be expanding into LATAM and APAC later this year. I started this position at Danaher in 2021, but I've worked in talent acquisition for over 20 years. With much of that time involving managing contingent workforce programs in the life sciences, biotechnology, chemical, and technology industries. I found my way into the contingent workforce management arena several years ago, but initially my roles focused on managing internal TA teams, and then staffing programs were just an extra, quote unquote hat that I wore. Some of the other vendor programs I managed along the way were relocation, law firms supporting immigration and affirmative action plans, relocation, outplacement. There's probably a few others I'm missing, right? But, and some of that was in smaller companies, right? So when you're in smaller companies, you tend to wear lots of hats. But I found, contingent workforce management was an area that I truly enjoyed, and I've been focused on managing large RPO and MSP programs now for just about the last 7 years. Danaher's MSP program, it is with an MSP vendor, obviously with Kelly OCG, and it's a partnership. Procurement owns the program, but I work alongside my procurement colleague, and we're side by side working with Kelly, and she's got her procurement perspective. I'm looking more from the talent perspective, and it's a good partnership. Past programs, I've been that sole owner, and maybe just had procurement coming into QBRs, but we are a really strong partnership. But the program has sat with procurement over the years here at Danaher, and I don't know that HR or talent acquisition is really looking to take ownership, so they're okay with me just consulting.
Sounds good. Well, we're happy to have you, Alan. And last we'll go to Eric, last but not least.
Well, hey, thanks again for having me, and thanks to Primary Talent Partners for putting this on. Really appreciate it. My name is Eric Osterhout. I'm with Enbridge. We're kind of a quiet company in the energy world, but we're about an $81 billion market cap company. We specialize in transportation of petrochemicals, among other things, liquefied natural gas, things like that. We're probably more of a household name in Canada than we are in the US, although that's changing rapidly. We just acquired some assets from a fairly sizable company called Dominion, you may have heard of, and we're in the process of integrating that. We are a program that is, our contingent labor program is under procurement, and that's where I sit in the category team. And primarily my responsibilities are managing the supply base and also special initiatives and projects. DEI falls under my purview, as well as the Enbridge Contingent Talent Community and a couple of other unique projects. The student programs and alumni and co-op programs fall under me. Like Alan, our program is partnered with an MSP, and the people part of our program is Kelly OCG as well, and they've done a swell job for us. Very happy to have them as a partner for the last 5 years. Our technology, we're powered by Fieldglass as our SAP Fieldglass as our VMS, and then also for our direct sourcing program, we are a managed direct sourcing program organization. We utilize a partner called Raise. They're our curation partners, and we use the technologies that they recommended for us, which is LiveHire, and it's been very successful with what we've done with them. So that's a little bit about our program. My background is I come from the staffing world originally, like many of us in our industry. We started out on that side of the fence. After about a decade on that side in various roles, all the way from starting out as an account manager and then becoming an account manager / recruiter / branch manager, sales manager, and a couple other roles. In 2008, I had the opportunity to jump the fence and I moved to the MSP world with a little company called IQ Navigator. Some of you may remember them. They're now part of Beeline. After a few years, I left that organization to pursue my dream, which was actually having an opportunity to basically create a program from scratch, including deploying the technology and the program offices and practices around it. And then from there, I've been at a couple of other places, but I've been 5 years here over at Enbridge. And yeah, we're really glad to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with y'all today.
Sounds good. Thank you, Eric, and thank you to all of you, Eric, Alan, and Amy, just for going into some of your background and kind of where your organization is right now within this conversation. I think it helps us shape why you'll answer some of the ways that you do and just provide us some insight. So before we kind of dive straight into the conversation, I wanted to provide just a little bit of background about what we're doing today and things that we'll discuss. So we'll go over a small overview of what happened in 2023. Then we'll go into trends in 2024 and balancing those. Next, we'll have the environmental impacts, collaborative efforts, and then finally looking forward. And then that will all go before our live Q&A, and we'll have some questions from our audience. So looking back at contingent workforce trends in 2023, I'm sure people can come up with a lot of different things that happened. I'm sure you guys can think of all the things that happened too. You can talk about why would we want to have a webinar about trends in 2024 if we're already here, or you can ask a lot of questions. Some may feel that there's a beauty in spontaneity. There definitely is. Trends definitely evolve over time. They're very unprecedented in some cases, so that can make it really intriguing. So I think that's a lot of the reason why we have the webinar. If we can talk about some of the things that we maybe foresee or predict, and we can get some industry experts or game changers like we have with us today, get some of their insights, then why not go ahead and do that? I'm a big believer in definitely looking at the past to make sure we're on the right trajectory going forward. So as we look at kind of what occurred in 2023, and we have this first icon here, kind of prompted to talk about how technology was on the forefront and had a lot of changes there, and how it impacted the landscape. CW professionals harness new platforms to manage their entire life cycle, making things more transparent, faster, speeding things up. We, of course, can't forget about AI or artificial intelligence coming onto the scene, which for some made their positions easier and their everyday in their role a lot easier, or maybe it wiped it away for some. So you can see a lot of changes there. Moving on to our person with all of the clocks in front of him or above him, we also see that the world shifted back into more of a hybrid status when we were working in not just maybe within the contingent workforce, but HR as a whole. Is that something that will continue to be more prevalent, or is that something that will go away? We'll kind of talk a little bit about that too. Next, we have the idea of reskilling or upskilling, something else that was really prevalent in 2023, whether it's transitioning full-time or transitioning contingent workers into more of a full-time role, or just doing different skill trainings to impact the culture in a positive way within the organization. And then lastly, we have programs gaining the desire to diversify for more than just ways of measuring spend and things like that. So if you in our audience have some other ideas of things that happened in 2023, definitely hold on to those. We would love to hear about them and kind of have some discussion about that as we go into that Q&A session at the end. But to start our discussion, Amy, I'm going to come to you first. This is just balancing the trends. How would you describe the current state of the contingent workforce? And this is just something from your perspective.
Sure. So the word that comes to mind describing the current state is evolving. I think that, and that's kind of broad to say, but I think that the contingent worker themselves is significantly different than it was even just a few years ago. And I think it will continue to morph. I think that there are categories of people who are in the contingent workforce today that may or may not actually realize that they're part of what we would consider to be contingent, because they're flexible and they're temporary. So we have gig workers and we have independent consultants and people who are striking out on their own and freelancers, and they may not even realize what kind of impact they're having into what we consider to be this entire temporary talent ecosystem that has really sort of taken off. And so I think that evolving and drawing attention to this new state of the contingent workforce is really important. And then when you think about the industry that captures all of those different types of workers, I also think that that's evolving. I've seen so much transition and so much discussion around reevaluating uses of technology, and are we using the best solutions that make sense for us to be able to handle all of this evolution in the programs that we're managing and the types of talents we're seeing. So reconsideration of our VMSs and the partners that we work with, the suppliers, who's doing something new and interesting and innovative. And so I've seen a lot of change and disruption, and I think it's good and it's healthy, because even if you don't end up making big changes, I think the discussion and kind of poking at what could be ultimately will lead to some new discoveries and some new ways. So evolution and continuing to kind of be excited and kind of taking each year in stride and seeing like, oh, well, that's new and different is how I'm feeling about it right now.
Okay, so continuing to evolve, but also being open to those fresh perspectives, new things.
Absolutely.
Alan or Eric, do y'all have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, I mean, it's you know, it's one of those things where some people would say, hey, things still feel the same as they used to be, yet there's a lot of change going on, right? And when I say that, I think of the things that are the same, right? So we still have a lot of companies with policies around tenure based on co-employment concerns, but the government's never specified a tenure duration that increases or minimizes that risk, right? So it differs from company to company. I've worked at companies where it's 12 months or it's 18 months. Some are really conservative, it's 6 months. Others may let it go a lot longer, right? So, you know, and then another thing that's the same is there continues to be a lot of rogue spend outside of our contingent workforce and other centrally managed programs, you know, via SOW at many companies. And yet that's been a topic people have talked about trying to get under control for a long time. But then some of those things that are changing, right? So a lot of companies are embracing technology in their contingent workforce programs. You know, you have VMSs and CRMs having a presence in a lot of programs, but then new technology like, you know, robotic process automation and AI coming into play in some programs, right? So not everybody's adopting those things as quickly as they could. And, you know, I think more and more companies are embracing freelancer marketplaces and that concept, right? So it's a lot of things are the same, but a lot of things are changing. I think Amy's word of evolution is a good point, right? And it's just that things are evolving at different paces, right? So some things are moving really quick, other things are not moving so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to echo that. I love the term evolution for this because that's what it is. I mean, things mature, right? And I liken it back to when MSP programs and VMS programs hit the market back in early 2000s, and it, you know, it was one of those that'll never fly. But the fact is, it really has. And as we've done our job as buyers and managers of these types of programs and been able to build the data cases to provide the leadership and show the value that the contingent workforce brings, and the increased and enhanced value of being able to provide the insights and the data through the tools that have also evolved along this journey, it's done great things. I think a lot of disruption in new stuff is going to become more mainstream as we move forward, just like it has since the early days of the Wild West with the MSPs and the VMSs. I think we're going to see a lot more focus, especially as the economy becomes more and more difficult to predict. I mean, we're seeing a lot of data out there that's almost contrary to each other's data points, and there's a lot of consternation and head scratching about how things are going to go. But the one thing you can count on is that with contingent labor, you at least have the ability to flex your organization to grow and ride the waves and hit the troughs as well, to be able to flex to manage what your stakeholders need, right? So I think evolution, and I think the new things that are coming to fruition, face it, freelancers in gig economy, it kind of brings the focus in some programs back on how is work being done? What is the best way to accomplish that work? And I think some programs are more ahead of others in the ability to say, all right, we need to look at work functionally and decide the best way to do it. Is it a contingent worker? Is it someone from a freelancer management type scenario like an Upwork or a Fiverr or somebody like that? Or is it a full-time employee? Is that the best way to accomplish this? Is this somebody we want to bring in, keep long-term, that can bring the expertise that we need to lead and then augment them with the contingent workforce? So I think the future looks bright for us. Are there going to be hiccups and roadblocks along the way and speed bumps? Yeah, of course. But I think if you're in this industry, there's a reason why you're in it for a lot, because some of us have even tried to leave it before and you just can't do it. You keep coming back because it is never the same. It's always evolving because you're dealing with people. That's the biggest thing to remember. So yeah, I think evolving really makes sense when you talk about the current state. So I'm excited for this year to see what this year brings and some of the trending that happens. And hopefully we'll be having this conversation in 2025 as well.
For sure. All of these are really great insights. And I think the main thing that I hear is just flexibility. I don't think that you could work with contingent workers and expect them to be flexible without on the buyer side being flexible too. And like you said, kind of going with the ebbs and flows of what the industry is saying. So for sure. Eric, if you want to take on the next one and kind of just stay with you, is it possible to achieve this harmony or this balance that I think all programs are trying to work on between cost, quality, diversity, and performance, or is it just two of them, or what's your perspective on that?
Well, I'd like to say it's a yin and yang kind of thing. There's a point of balance, right? I mean, but actually with all of these different parameters on this slide, yeah, I think there is a way to achieve all of it. I think it has to do with being able, when you have a program, to be able to understand what your demands are. Again, looking at work functionally and figuring out the best way to handle that work, and then having the ability to have the tools to be able to manage the costs and provide that data, and also the ability to balance the quality of your resources, right? Being able to make sure that you're getting the best talent into your program as possible. In diversity, I think the big shift with diversity now that I'm seeing is a few years ago, at least in the US, diversity was more about certifications of a company. I've seen a shift just over the last 3 years in a lot of the panels and things that I've been involved in, and it's something I truly take to the heart, the diversity at that candidate level, being able to see that you've got different points of views being exhibited by the folks you're bringing into the organization, because that to me is competitive advantage. Groupthink is never going to take your company long-term to be a top of the market competitor. Having that different viewpoints, different experiences, and things like that will help. And I think the diversity also drives the performance of your organization. So that last part. But when it comes to performance, there is an ability to achieve harmony in cost, quality, diversity, and performance based on performance too, right? Being able to know your demand, like I said, and being able that you don't oversaturate your supply base by having too many suppliers competing. I know I upset a lot of people in the industry because I tell them, look, I just don't have the demand to support another supplier. But in a way, if you think about it, would you rather me bring on everybody that darkens my doorway or sends me an email, and then you're competing against too many suppliers? Your recruiters are not going to like that. They're going to take those workers over where there's less competition. So we have to be good stewards of making sure that our suppliers are successful within our programs by not overpopulating it. It's the holy trinity. We have to have the best possible resource, best possible price point, and then deployed as quickly as possible, and then follow up after the fact to make sure that we are getting the value out of them based on performance with our suppliers. Scorecarding is something that I think companies really need to focus on. Performance scorecarding. I tend to look at it from the old days when I was on the other side of the desk as a supplier, and I would look at how many opportunities, how many were responded to, and ultimately how many placements, right? Because that tells me how efficient my supply base is. It tells me they know my business if they have a high hit rate or placement rate against the opportunities I send over. So I do think there is a way to balance all of these. And there's other unique things that we've done in our program, and we can get to those in some of the later questions, particularly around DEI. We've done some unique things, and we've worked on some partnerships with one of our partners to be able to create more opportunity for smaller suppliers that are of diverse in nature and not just certified, but also bring the goods to the table and have that census. And the last thing I'll say on the diversity piece before we get deeper into that later is, if you're a diversity supplier and you're certified, always be sure when you're reaching out to organizations, be ready for that answer. Tell me, because I do it all the time, and sometimes I catch people off guard, and I don't mean to. I'm just very passionate about bringing that diversity at the candidate level. Be prepared to answer me when I ask you, all right, well, what does your billable headcount actually look like, right? I mean, what is the diversity makeup of that? I think that's a huge thing that a lot of certified diversity suppliers fail to account for to be ready, and it catches them kind of off guard when you ask that as a buyer, because there has been that history in the past of, oh, just a certification, that's great, we just want the numbers. That's just a personal opinion of me, but okay, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, you just provided a wealth there. And yeah, going deeper than just that certification, and to your other point of, suppliers that will come in and the market is too competitive. I know from our suppliers' perspective, we don't want to be anywhere where we can't be successful. We want it to be, a playing field where we can do well. And so it's good to hear you say those things for sure. Alan or Amy, do y'all have anything to add there?
Yeah, if I could go, I think of harmony or balance in these areas like a seesaw. I feel like sometimes the business is going to demand quality and performance in a way that cost no longer matters, or you have to sort of overlook your diversity standards in order to push an initiative, a project, something really critical. Quality and performance supersedes it. And so you pivot and you put all of your efforts towards making sure that that demand is met. And then our responsibility is to then keep an eye on it and then slowly pull it back towards the center, right? So we've done the seesaw, and we then are slowly moving it back and keeping an eye on cost and diversity and other things that are truly important, and not letting it slip so far down where suddenly we're getting a bunch of low-cost providers, or we've tipped too many eggs into certain providers, and now our quality and performance has slipped. So I think it's a balancing act, and I think there's a meeting in the middle, and I think that we do achieve it at times, and it feels really good to do that. But it's a constant monitoring of, how are we doing and who are we working with, and what is the satisfaction level of the business? Are we meeting demands, and what is the current demand? Is it, the really quality talent that we need, or do we need to be more focused on the cost savings and then kind of balancing from there? So hearing the business and prioritizing based off of their feedback gives me the goals that I need, and then I try to make sure that I'm not ignoring the other items around it.
So sometimes that importance moves.
Definitely, constantly. I feel like one year, we coming out of COVID, find talent, find people, like truly just find people that can serve a purpose. Cost kind of took a back seat. Admittedly, like it was, you paid what you needed to because work needed to be done. Business came back and it was what it was. That needed to shift back. We can't sacrifice quality and performance, right? Like you still want to walk in and have a great experience at a Ritz-Carlton or a St. Regis, but you need to then pay attention to, okay, did we go too far here, or did we properly promote like our diverse suppliers in this market, and are we making sure that our customers or our stakeholders know that they have options available to them, and are we still doing the right thing, even though as we try to ebb back from that demand for quality and performance was key, then it was quality, now it's getting back to cost and diversity. So yes, it shifts.
Yep, and Riley, I think Eric and Amy both raised a lot of good points, so I can just kind of confer what they've said is that, we need to make sure we're hearing the voice of the customer when we're making our strategic program decisions, and that we're considering things that might impact the quality and speed of delivery of the human capital to the business, right? Because we tend to put a lot of program controls in place, whether they're cost controls, whether it's from an HR perspective, we're trying to guarantee diversity is coming into our process, but we have to remember, especially with contingent workforce, it's usually an ASAP request from the manager, and it's really actually, I needed this person 2 weeks ago, but I'm just now getting approved for a budget for this, or whatever the other trigger was that they were waiting for. So we have to have a program that's built for speed, that is mindful of those cost controls, mindful of having an established process and following that process, but that there are those times where we have to make those exceptions to our cost controls or to our process controls. And it's really hard because especially when you're in a situation of outsourcing to a vendor, they map the process and they train their team to follow that process to a T every time. So you need to have an account manager, and you need to have your program manager internally that can intervene and help make those adjustments and exceptions when you need to.
Yeah, and let me add one more thing, just kind of a clarification, because being a procurement guy, when I'm talking about cost, I think a lot of people equate cost with rate structure. Many times, oh, you're going to cut rates, cut rates. That's not necessarily it. In our program, for example, we run off of market rates, right? We have not to exceed market rate carding in place. And the reason why we do that is because we understand that different suppliers have different cost structures internally, and we don't want to be in that payment and dictating how how much profit you make kind of thing, right? So we operate off of market rates that we refresh, and we've got tools to do that. Now, that being said, when you're talking about cost cutting and you're talking about market rates, we refresh market rates. And believe me, market rate carding is not, it's always a look back. So take 2022. 2022 was Mr. Toad's Wild Wacky Ride, right? I mean, you couldn't keep rate carding in sync fast enough with how the market was changing as we started to move out from under the shadow of COVID, a pandemic like nobody's ever seen before. And we've had to figure out and pivot and do things to figure it out. So it got a little crazy. 2023 was a little more stable. Things were starting to stabilize. People weren't moving around as much. Suppliers were able to control candidates a little better. There wasn't the 3 and 4 job offers at a time. But when I'm talking about cost cutting, there are other ways that you can look at a program to control costs without being, the cost cutter with the scissors out there cutting the price off of the tag on the shelf. You can do other creative things, which is why direct sourcing for us was a major area of where we could save costs, because in a way, direct sourcing being payrolling on steroids and usually working your way upwards from a pay rate. And I know I said I don't like to get into pay rate, but since you're dealing with John Q. Public or Susie Q. Public, you're actually working from the pay side of the equation to determine a bill rate. So you can actually control those costs and bring the cost down by encouraging competitive sourcing and pushing it in a tier 0 capacity to your direct sourcing program, and ultimately be able to save money. I mean, right now we're on a trajectory just on the folks we have in the program. As of last week when I ran the numbers, we're going to save $1 million this year off of rates overall, off of our bottom line, just because of the fact we're driving more business through the competitive sourcing method. Does that mean that, the direct sourcing team, does that mean that we're never going to need suppliers? No, of course not. They can't fill everything. We're just going to need fewer suppliers, and we'll need better suppliers. And when it comes to not to exceed rate carding, we're not that draconian on it. Our program teams are instructed, if a supplier says, hey, I can't find somebody I can either get you somebody to do the job at X price, or I can get you somebody less qualified at the NTE, we're going to say, okay, if the program team is hearing multiple suppliers on the rec, usually we have 5 to 7 suppliers on a rec. If they're all saying, yeah, we can't find anybody to do that job at that rate, we're going to flex upward on that. That's the key. Someone said flexibility earlier, but when I say cost, you can have many of those things, and it doesn't always have to be about beating up your suppliers to bring in lower cost candidates. It's about managing and using the data to tweak the levers behind the scenes to make things happen, and then delivering to your stakeholders the best possible resource at the best possible cost. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eric. And you brought up a great point of following the data and being very data driven with what you're looking for. And that can kind of bring us into our next question here, which is a little bit about skill sets. And Alan, if you wouldn't mind taking this one, what do you feel the steps organizations can take to ensure they have access to potential employees with those skills that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I think one way to ensure access to the right skills is to be more proactive in forecasting and planning for talent needs, and to look for ways to train and reskill the workforce to fit the company's needs instead of always going to market to compete for a limited pool of skilled workers. I think this training and reskilling can happen in a variety of job families, and I think we're seeing a lot of staffing firms in the technology space, including primary talent partners, implementing these types of programs that expand the pool of qualified workers in the high demand jobs. I think beyond that approach, I believe that we need to ensure that our hiring managers and business leaders are well informed on the labor market dynamics that are influencing our ability to hire qualified talent quickly. Some of the market intelligence that they need to be aware of, would include, supply and demand for this particular talent in the market. So for example, who are the major competitors for talent? how does our employer brand and culture compare to those competitors? Is there enough skilled talent available locally, and things like that. I think another piece of market intelligence would be, as Eric mentioned with the not to exceeds, is knowing the prevailing pay rates for talent, right? So knowing will it be hard to attract and retain talent if the company chooses to pay below market pay. I think the prevailing markup rates, for the agencies. So, Eric mentioned that too with the not to exceeds is, if you're controlling your markup rates and kind of, capping an agency's ability to bring in talent or to do their other efforts to find talent, you're really gonna have a bunch of agencies working on your jobs, but you're not going to receive qualified talent. And then I think the other piece that I think a lot of managers have lost touch with, and I think this comes a lot in the light industrial space. So when I'm thinking about our manufacturing environment at Danaher, and even when I was still at BASF, is managers are not in touch with the current workforce preferences. So the old generation in the manufacturing workforce didn't mind working 12-hour rotating shifts, but the new generation in the manufacturing workforce places a higher priority on work-life balance and quality time with their family and their own well-being. So if they're still thinking of the old Dow DuPont schedules and how they're going to rotate shifts, and from an operational perspective, I understand why that's easier for the plant manager. But if they're not hearing the data from HR, from procurement, from their contingent workforce program, the people are simply saying they don't want to work those 12-hour shifts. And if they're not willing to change, they're going to continue to not have the talent they need. So that was a long answer, but certainly an area I'm passionate about. And I have to say, when I talk about the forecasting and planning, I've never worked any place that does a great job of strategic workforce planning, or at least if they do, they don't tell us where we have to deliver to talent, right? Whether that's contingent workforce or full-time hiring. We're usually the last to know about business expansions, business contractions, and other things that are going to impact, our hiring initiatives. So, I'll pause there and let you move to someone else to get their comments.
Sure. Yeah, I'll open it up, Amy or Eric.
Yeah, preach, Alan. I love that last part. That was so true. We're impacted. I don't think I've ever been in a program that isn't impacted the same way. That's just huge.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. So I completely agree with what you said. It's forecasting, it's knowing what you're needing, it's prepping and working with the suppliers and getting ahead of it and all of that, and such good concepts. I'll take it a different way, and I've been trying to encourage looking at different types of talent, and one of the I feel like lesser tapped areas is independent consultants. I think that when there's so much fear or consternation around the idea of engaging with somebody, if you need a certain type of work done, that tends to be somebody that plugs in with skills, and they come and they only want to deliver on a particular skill. And so I feel like involving an organization to where there's a healthy, right way to engage with different types of talent and this says potential employees, but I'm going a whole different way. Non-employees, just look for other channels, look for other ways that you can find access to talent. I also think upskilling is really important. And sort of, if you find yourself with workers who are good and they and that they could be an asset to the organization in new areas, we've found that working with the suppliers, or even so, we do a weird thing. We actually employ the majority of our temporary workers for our professional workforce at headquarters, and so we will encourage, learning some new things or sharing access to some learning resources and upskilling. We do like the concept of, focusing on skills and diving into that, putting an emphasis on that in our direct sourcing program of tagging back skills and making sure that once we've validated that somebody can in fact do this one task or work with this one program, that we are able to really quickly go talk to them again if we see that there's additional needs coming up. But boy, if forecasting wouldn't help us a whole lot, and just getting that ahead of time, because sometimes by the time you have that awareness, they've already been picked up and dropped into a new job. So yeah, just keep educating and keep asking for that upfront feedback. We do think we're all trying, aren't we?
Yeah, the other thing that's kind of interesting too, and I think COVID drove a lot of this, was or post-COVID was there was more openness to being able to manage non-employee workers in alternate locations instead of where the manager sat. And I think that has helped open up a lot. I have been a big proponent of remote work, even from the beginning, or semi-remote work, hybrid, because it opens up your candidate pooling. And when 2022 and 2023 were coming around, 2022 primarily, and there was so much upward rate pressure, wage pressure on your bill rates, by opening up your pools of candidates to other areas and introducing remote workers, or workers that could sit in Calgary as opposed to Houston, or Houston as opposed to Duluth, or Duluth as opposed to Houston, some markets were less expensive, and you could actually eke back to cost savings as well. You could eke out cost savings as well, but you're also opening up to more candidates, and that flexibility helped us get the right skills that we need. Our organization, sadly, is, well, it's not sadly, I mean, it's just a fact. We just are not the kind of bring on tons of repetitive roles that are entry-level skills in our organization, to where where you can kind of encourage the boot camp type suppliers that can train workers to then come in and take the entry level job. There's one that just came to mind. They do software testers. They have boot camps for software testers, and that would be great for a technology company that maybe does a lot of software testing. They do customer facing technology type stuff. For us, that doesn't really work, but being able to be open to other thoughts, and our leaders being more open, and they have been, about, let's look at where the best place is to get the workers to do the work. Because one of the things, again, what we learned during the pandemic was business could still go on without people being right there in your office. It just actually was very, very successful. And moving that forward, that will continue to give you that access to employees with the right skills.
Thank you, Eric. And I think this must be a topic that you are a little passionate about. Alan mentioned that he was passionate about the kind of skills conversation that we just had, and I saw you reposted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago some article about remote work being here to stay, or is it going out, or where are we with that now? And we're kind of teasing that, so we'll go ahead and move into it. Is hybrid work something that will remain prevalent? Is it something that will continue? And how do you guys feel like that will impact the industry?
I actually am a big proponent of flexibility, not just in work conditions, but overall in programs and in working with and being an employee. I think for me, flexibility in remote work and hybrid work, I find to be very important. And I think organizations, and I've said this for years, and I'm not always agreed with, even internally in my own organization, but we have landed on a hybrid model that seems to make sense for our organization moving forward. I'm hoping it stays in place. I'm cautiously optimistic. And the reason why is because I think that it helps us attract more candidates and better candidates. When it comes to full flexibility, I believe organizations need to embrace flexibility more in how work gets done. People at different points in their career have different needs for how they want to work, and I think business should have different needs in how they expect workers to work based on different needs in a career. All right. And what I mean by that is, when I was younger, I mean, I don't look too bad for 80 years old, but I mean, sunscreen helps a lot. But when I was first involved in industry, and I wanted to be on site every day. I never wanted to go home. I wanted to hang out with people after work even. I mean, that's how much I wanted to be on site. That's where the buzz was. That's how you could get to know the movers and shakers. As I got older and became more set in my career and understood how things worked, and I've proven myself with the work ethic that I have, it's different for me now. I don't need to be in the middle of the action every day. I need to be able to do my job. And in fact, actually, when I'm remote, I probably get more done, and I can think more clearly and have less interruptions. And actually, I'm more creative when I'm not constantly on site. So I think hybrid work is great because you kind of blend that. You do 3 days on site, at least in our company, we do 3 days on site, and then 2 days you work remote. And on the 2 days that I'm remote, I can fit in more meetings. It's less stressful for me as I age. And as the graying of the workforce happens, I got a few gray hairs, the beard's pretty white. It helps extend careers. There's a lot of talk out there about, well, the graying of the workplace, and we're just not getting people that can do the jobs anymore and have the institutional knowledge and blah, blah, blah. The fact is, if we would keep workers longer by, embracing their needs, by allowing them to keep that expertise and still provide value to the organization without having to face the grind of a 50-mile commute. Okay, I'm speaking about myself, 50-mile commute. But it actually could extend your career, and I think it will actually keep people in the workplace longer, and it will provide value. It'll pay off. So overall, yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it. I see some companies are starting to try and drive people back to the office. I find that to be kind of sad, and I also think that long term, will you be able to see impacts in organizational performance based on companies that embrace flexibility for people at different points in their career? Will that translate to competitive advantage? I think it does. You'll attract better, more experienced workers, I believe, if you have that flexibility. Not everybody needs to be on site all the time. Personally, if it were up to me, I would be on the site when I need to be. But I also understand, as an organization, I have to comply and also be a team player. And so if we have a hybrid work schedule, that's meeting me halfway. So I'm happy, right? So that's kind of where I stand on it. Yeah, I guess I am a little bit passionate about it.
Just a little, but yeah, I think you could say you have one guy on this side and one guy on this side that says, yeah, being hybrid and being remote, you have a lot more productivity when you're at home. But on this side, at least from my perspective and what I've experienced being so new into our industry, you can learn so much from being in the office and being around your seasoned colleagues, and just being around the lingo is even helpful because you pick it up so much faster, I think, when you're around it all the time.
Flexibility, different points in the career require different things. Totally agree.
Sure.
Yeah, we are a business of personal connections and being in person. And so we are a company that leans more towards the in-person experiences and have opened ourselves up to more remote workers over time. But at the end of the day, there's the majority of our workforce across the globe is at the property. So two things that I see. One is that there are roles that can be hybrid and don't require an on-site presence every single day. It expanded the range of candidates that would not say no from the moment that we ask them about the job, right? The recruiter can reach out and you now will be able to talk to candidates that live 50 miles away, like Eric does. You previously would probably get I can't make that drive every single day, no thanks. Hybrid means, you know what, I think I could do that once or twice a week if that's what that meant. As someone who also has a very long commute, that's sort of where I landed was, you know what, for the right position, I can do a little bit longer of a drive if it doesn't mean I have to do it all the time. So hybrid to me means your radius around the location expanded and it gave you a little bit of a greater access to candidates. So that's good news. I do think that for people who are required to be on site, and so if there is a greater option for flexibility, I think we all have some level of needing people to report on site every single day in our industries, and you need to create a better value prop for the people that show up every single day. I think the experience needs to be there. They need to feel good about coming to work every single day, or it will just become harder and harder to attract any sort of talent to come in and be willing to take those jobs, whether it's, you know, in rates, but I think it's more about just what it feels like when it comes to work day in and day out. And so when they're looking around and they see that a lot of people have flexibility, some jobs just will never have flexibility. They require people to show up every day. And if you're going to take one of those jobs, you know, it's incumbent on it's, you know, important for the organization to realize that they need to create a welcoming experience for them. So.
Yep. And I would just add in there, I mean, I think, and probably my biggest fear with the swing to return to office or even the hybrid roles, right, is that, you know, we have roles that traditionally were never allowed to work remote. I can remember years ago, HR people losing their minds if they found out that an administrative assistant took their laptop home and was working from home, because now they feel like they need to pay them overtime, right? Because their job's an hourly paid job. And a lot of companies never would put contingent workers in the roles that could be remote, because somehow there was that lack of trust and we had to see them in person at the site. And even though they had access to our network, whether it was on site or at home, we just trusted them more. But during the pandemic, we still had to get work done, so we let all of those people work from home. So now this push to return to office and, kind of the compromise of hybrid roles, I just worry, that we might eventually want to pull certain jobs into the office all the time just because of their job, right? So either it's going to be the non-exempts, right, or the administrative assistants, or it's going to be the contingent workers that we feel like have to be on site, and then you start disrupting that workforce and the flexibility people need. And I also think the forcing people to be in the office, whether it's 2 days a week or 3 days a week, takes away the flexibility of actually also giving somebody, hey, instead of being here at 8 a.m., you can schedule your day that none of your meetings start until 11. That person might come into the office 5 days a week if they knew they could avoid the morning rush hour and not sit in traffic and get their kids to school or whatever their other obligations are. So I think there's still a whole lot of opportunity to look at other ways to be flexible, still have presence in the office when it's needed, but give people that better quality of life that they're not losing their mind sitting in traffic every morning and every evening.
Sure, for sure. Thank you for all those insights. It's good to hear the different perspectives for sure. Going into our next question, we are just talking about the contingent workers and making sure whether it's a contingent worker or just someone that's not full-time, how can you make sure that they feel a part of the organization, or how can they collaborate with those full-time employees? I think these questions are really building on one another. We just talked about whether it's important to be in the office and whether hybrid is here to stay, or however you want to phrase it. But I think that collaboration and that camaraderie has a lot to do with that too. And I'll just open it up to any of you.
This can be hard to do. It can be hard to do when you have a lot of kind of concern or general awareness of mixing and matching and making it feel like they're one of the team. But I do think that focusing on work and driving towards goals and achievements, and if people are working together and you can highlight successes and be champions of the work that you're all doing together, sometimes that can be enough, right? You create a really we do that with vendor partners and all sorts of people that we collaborate with, and we don't walk away from it feeling like we're on the same team, we're working towards the same goals, we all have our own objectives, but we don't walk away all feeling like we have the same employer. And maybe that's just what you really need to focus on, is just operationally, and how are we coming together, celebrating the successes, making sure that their employers are aware of the great job that they're doing along the way, and that they're feeling welcome and getting that feedback along the way. Can you tell I'm in hospitality? I just want everybody to feel loved and happy and like they belong. It's just all about kumbaya for me. But I think it's really important. Otherwise, you start to sense that they pull away and they don't feel like they're part of the team, and then the work product drops off, and then you start to get the complaints, and then you have disgruntled situations. So just creating that feeling of being belonging and being wanted, I think is really important.
I love what you said there. It kind of kicked off a couple of thoughts. Fortunately, at a lot of companies that I've either worked with, I've been a contractor or a consultant, as well as an employee at different parts of my career. Most of the companies I've been at, I was fortunate enough that really contingent workers, contractors, consultants, however you wanted to look at it, were actually treated really, really well. I think the organization I'm at now, Enbridge, we treat our contingent workers extremely well, in that there is a lot of blending. I think most of those folks that have been there on a contingent basis long term are embedded in a team. There's a lot of, they feel like a part of the team, and their managers view them that way and are very, very conscious of how they are perceived and how how they're treated, right? I mean, especially sometimes overly so, which gets back to what you were talking about, Amy. I mean, some companies are very concerned about the blending of that, so to speak. But what you mentioned that really kind of resonated with me was how they feel when they're working, if they feel valued, if they feel like they're a part of the team, if they feel like they're being diminished, things like that cause problems. I think that translates also over to full-time employees and company employees. Sadly, I don't think we've licked that battle yet either at a lot of organizations where people do feel diminished and they vote with their feet. I mean, they end up feeling like they're in a toxic environment and leave. And I think to me that's just tragic when that happens. And I think it's also not necessarily an entire organization, but an entire organization could get painted that way because of a few bad managers, right? I'm sure you all have seen that. People don't leave companies, is the old saying. They leave toxic managers. So the same thing when we do see a problem with contingent workers having an issue with a group, we look at it holistically because it is rare at our organization, but sometimes it's a matter of counseling the hiring leader and letting them know how they're being perceived and maybe trying to rectify that. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, right? And it has to get escalated. But overall, though, I think I've been lucky in the places where I've been and had programs that most of our contingent workers usually feel pretty valued and are fairly happy with how they feel in the way of collaboration. So good points.
Yeah, and I would just throw in there, I mean, I think, a lot of times when you do have an environment where maybe it doesn't feel as collaborative or, the contingent workers don't feel like they belong, usually it's because the managers and everybody else are following the company's policies that might have been driven by risk aversion around co-employment or other things, right? But I think we do have to work to bring, attention to the fact that treating the contingent workers differently is not really aligned to the company's DE&IB commitment, right? And assuming you're working for a company with one of those commitments. So I think if you do find you're in that situation where you don't have this harmony among the workforce, you got to pull together the right stakeholders and review those possibly dated risk mitigation policies and figure out if there's a way to modernize those policies, right? And I mean, I think the way is to get more collaboration and more belonging in that contingent workforce is find ways to let them join either things like employer resource groups or, change your tenure guidelines so they don't feel like they have to leave, and whether that's a departure for 3 months or 6 months, because the government's also never said there's a reset period, yet companies have written that into their tenure guidelines. Figure out the way to make them feel like they belong and feel like they're valued, and take away some of those policies that may create a little bit of a class system between your full-time employees and your contingent workers.
Tenure, that's something that you brought up, and I'm so glad you did, because I think that risk is so overblown. Now, I am a fan of soft tenure policies, meaning if a worker's been here for a certain amount of time, review why that worker is still a contingent worker. Maybe they need to be an employee. I'm all for that, reviewing, the lay of the land to figure out, is there a better way we can engage with this worker? What are their career aspirations? Where do they want to be? Is there a possibility that this person could be reskilled, upskilled, like we were talking about earlier? I think that's hugely important. The other thing I want to bring up, and at the risk of maybe being a little controversial, is, and granted, I think my organization does a really good job at this. So this is not about my organization. This is just other organizations I've talked to. I think at many organizations, their legal doesn't really understand managing contingent labor, right? They may have employment attorneys on staff, and I've encountered this at other places, but they really don't understand contingent labor and what the risks really are. I really love listening to Eric Rumbaugh when I get a chance to attend something that he does or visit with him. He gets it. I mean, that's his specialty. And I think too few companies have an Eric Rumbaugh-like specialist for contingent labor. I think we'll see more of that in the future as we're talking about future trends. I think we're going to see that employment law groups are going to be more focused on how contingent labor really works and how the risks really are, or what the risks really are, and potential ways of mitigating it. Because I think you're right, Alan, there's a lot of historical policies that need to go the way of the dinosaur out there. They really do.
Right. Yeah, most of them were written before we started having MSPs, or we built programs like Amy's that are run internally but have kind of those firewalls built that you have policy in place and you're buffering yourself from co-employment issues. And let's face it, most of the risks that we have are outside of our programs. They're going to be more the rogue independent contractors that get brought in, and things like that, right? To where there are none of those firewalls built in. So, I mean, I agree with you. And most, like I said, most of those policies are probably written before we had MSPs, right? And they just live on. And nobody's ever went back and asked the employment lawyer to revisit it, right? And when I was at BSF, we changed our tenure guidelines, and I wound up asking our in-house legal counsel. I said, hey, I know you guys use an external counsel too, and I said, here's the stuff I read when I went through my CCWP certification and what SIA thinks about tenure guidelines. I'm like, can you go ask your external attorney what they think, and is our risk any different after 1 year or 2 years than it is day one? And I knew what the answer would come back from the lawyer is that the risk of choosing to have a contingent worker is just as bad day one as it is after 2 years. So we wound up rebuilding our tenure policy that it could be 12 months at a time. When a manager wanted to extend that contingent worker, they had to sign that extension document that says they talked to their boss and their department finance person to see if there was headcount to convert. And the answer was no, we're not going to have headcount for the next year, so we want to extend for another 12 months. And therefore, we built a program where it was a temporary assignment, 12 months at a time, but we made sure the business was looking at the capability to convert before they would go another 12 months. So, there's ways to do it, and legal was okay with that once they got that outside guidance, and we built something that suited the needs of our business.
And that, for those of you playing along at home, is another professional tip from Alan Chilson. I love that. I love the way they did that. That's a great way to do it. You're controlling the financial aspects of it as well as the risk. That's beautiful.
Yep.
Awesome. I want to jump into our last driver question here, just so we have enough time for Q&A at the end. And it's a little bit of a general one. Just of what we've covered today, have we left anything out? Are there any emerging trends that we feel will significantly impact talent in the industry? And we've talked about a lot today, again, but something maybe that we haven't mentioned?
So I would love to double click into Eric's concept of flexibility, because this is something I feel very passionately about. Now we get into Amy's passionate topic.
This is your passion.
This is my passion. I think that we have all sorts of generations now who are looking for different types of flexibility. They are looking, we have Gen Alpha, Gen Z, who are looking for flexibility so that they can travel and they can take breaks, and they may not be looking for a 60-hour grind right out of college, and I don't blame them. Then you have millennials and Gen X who are caregivers of both children and their parents, and so they may need pauses in their career. And then you have boomers and beyond who are maybe not wanting to fully retire from the workforce, but they would love to take a step back, also not looking for 60-hour grind anymore. And hopefully not that many people are doing 60-hour grinds anymore, but they all kind of look at their options and they go, well, I'd really love something that was a little more flexible. I think where we as enterprise organizations need to do a better job is creating those opportunities for people who have a lot to give to our workforces, and create more contingent opportunities that can allow people who are great workers with great skill sets to contribute to our organization in a non-traditional way. So I frequently ask managers when they bring us a contingent role, is this a full 40 or can this be 220s? Can this be 220s? And you don't need, if you're looking for a couple of skill sets and you want somebody, I have an example right now where they really wanted somebody who had a change management background, but they also really wanted communication skills. Finding someone who has both of those, and you're going to split that role between two things, what about 2 20-hour resources? And we're finding a lot of great candidates that fit the bill who are caregivers and need to take care of their kids in the morning and the evenings, but they're doing great work for us between 10 and 3. So that for me is, in terms of a trend, if we as organizations can do a better job, we will find that the contingent workforce and the people who are drawn to it is going to expand dramatically, and we're going to be really pleased with the what we're seeing out of that. But we have to make the move to make those opportunities available and kind of sell them out to that particular workforce.
Love that.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah,
So
I think
flexibility.
that's just a huge differential, right? Because you're so expanding your workforce, the available talent pool. If you can get managers to say, yeah, I could take 2 people to do this job, they could do a job share. I mean, years ago, I remember seeing a couple of job shares, but they were where we had really unique people that needed flexibility for a different reason, whether it was a parent that had to take care of, children. But those were trend-setting managers back then, right? They were willing to do a job share. But I think trying to find the way to do that, especially in the contingent environment, is huge.
Couple of trends that I see. Skills-based hiring. Everybody acts like it's something new. Back when I was a recruiter, we called it pipeline recruiting, right? But I think something that's going to go hand in hand with that is there's going to be a push, and I think we're already seeing some of it with companies where we remove some of the roadblocks. We go back to the basics of requisition writing. What's really important to the job? And we start seeing companies getting rid of ridiculous educational requirements. Obviously, if you have to be licensed, it's a CPA position, it's a lawyer, whatnot, and you have to have those credentials, great. That makes all the sense in the world. But for someone that can do a job that doesn't really require a license, a advanced degree, and requiring it, again, goes back to limiting your candidate pools, and it's going to drive your rates up. What I think we're going to see, and I'm already seeing much of it, and it's another one of my passion subjects, I really hate seeing requisitions because I do surf other companies to see what they're doing. And it just astounds me how many still have that requires a BS degree in BS. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And the job is not that complex. It's an analyst on a team or something, and it's not that specific. So I think we're going to see a trend with skills-based hiring to maybe open that up. And some companies, believe me, are already being very heads up about it. I think we'll see more of that, especially as the population ages and people are chased from the workforce because of lack of flexibility. We're going to see more roles that need to be filled. So that's my big trend. The other big thing that I predict, and I don't know that it will happen in this next year, but I think that if in the US we could ever get a national health care plan that makes sense, truly affordable, truly flexible to keep your doctor, maybe portable from company to company, I think we're going to see a huge ballooning of the contingent and gig workforce. I really do, because if people work, especially when you get up to my age, 80 years old, as I said, you work for your health insurance in a lot of ways, right? And it limits your choices as to where you're going to go. So I think if that ever happens, and sometimes I think, I put on my tinfoil hat, and we won't go into that, but I think that both parties sometimes don't want that to happen, because big business doesn't want that to happen, because they know that will hold employees in place. I think that limits the flexibility. So those are the trends that I predict. At some point that will change, and that we will see a huge uptick in what we're calling freelancers, which we've known, we've had them for years. We always called them independents, but those are my predictions.
Yep. And do I dare say mine? I mean, the robots are coming, right? So, but it's not only robots. I think we're going to continue to see companies doing, labor arbitrage, right? They're going to continue to move transactional work into centers of expertise, often offshoring or, putting in the clusters regionally. But they may also automate some of that transactional work with robotic process automation and AI. But I guess, then my emerging trend really is that we'll continue to see some jobs replaced by new ways of getting those transactional jobs done. But I think it really isn't anything new, right? Because we've seen jobs like administrative assistants and bank tellers replaced, or, at least that workforce doing those jobs significantly reduced by technology and automation over the years, right? So, so I think my emerging trend's not new, right? But I think we'll just continue to see that need. And I think Eric just mentioned it too, the reskilling of our workforce, because certain jobs are going to be replaced by technology and automation, but that has happened several times over, the last many years. And I think we just need to ensure that the available talent matches the needs of the available jobs, which comes back to that need of forecasting and planning for workforce needs. But I think we need to embrace that some things are going to change. I mean, we've all changed across the course of our career, right? Amy mentioned her boomerang back to Marriott, and she did some other things in between. And none of us went to college to do what we're doing right now. So I think to Eric's point too, is sometimes the educational requirements in jobs are not as relevant as the experience people bring. But I think we have to continue to adapt as humans and help our workforce adapt too.
You guys have really made all of these topics just come to life. It's one thing to just have them on your screen, but it's another thing for you guys to expand on them and just share all of your thoughts. So this has been really, really great, and I appreciate all of those insights. Definitely want to turn over to our audience now that we have some time left over, and just to share some of their questions that we've been getting as we've continued forward. One that I see is, as suppliers, our job is to source the best talent for the job. That could be anywhere along the wide range of diversity. So how do you ensure your establishment and teams sorry, my vision is bad. I thought that my contacts work better than this. Okay. How do you ensure your established teams are also motivated to select diverse individuals and not just the best talent available? So how do you make sure you're seeking diverse, but also the best at the same time?
So I think this always becomes hard in the contingent workforce world, right? Because a manager is always going to say, I need to get this job done quickly. I need the best talent that I can get for this price point, because they're going to be able to get more work done for me. This is a challenge I've seen. I mean, we've had processes in my last two employers on the full-time hiring side to ensure we're getting diverse candidates into the pool, making sure we're getting diverse candidates onto the interview stage as well. But it's harder to do with the contingent workforce. And whereas most of the suppliers can track and report the diversity of their workforce and the people they send to us on assignment, they're not all tracking that ahead of time, right? So they can't even tell us they've submitted a diverse candidate pool, usually at the candidate stage. And I don't know if Amy and Eric, if you guys have suppliers that are telling you that up front instead of once you place people. So I think that becomes a challenge. But I think the burden that's on all of us as employers is to train our managers so they understand how to be open to diverse talent, how to, interview and assess in such a way that they are continuing to give those diverse people a chance to come through and get those jobs, right? And that they're not in there with that closed mind of, I need the BS and BS, and I need, umpteen years of experience for an entry-level job, right? So it's continuing to train managers, right? And we've made some shifts in our diversity goals this year. And I was actually just on a training for HR today for them to understand how to support talent acquisitions initiatives. And this is for our full-time hiring. So I think there's a lot of training involved, right? If we want to affect that change in the hiring processes.
I would echo that. At the end of the day, it's about access. It's about getting suppliers in the game that can provide diverse candidates. But at the end of the day, it's also the best candidate for the job. So I echo that. One of the things early in my career and what I loved about IT staffing and engineering staffing back in the day was it wasn't about, there was, especially during that time coming up on Y2K, for example, it was about who has the experience and who has done the project, the job, the tasks, that had the experience in the certain software package, whatever. It didn't really matter where they came from. So you had an automatic, very diverse population on many program teams. And to me, that's really what I loved about it, because being a kid who didn't go to the best of schools and raised by a single parent and wasn't in all the cliques and the clubs, I loved it because it was almost an equal playing field for me. And so, I think Alan's absolutely right. It's about carrying the message forward and being that ripple like a pebble in the pond and spreading out. I've seen just tremendous gains over the last few years with acceptance of being able to look at diverse candidates of all types. And I think our populations and tracking that census as we've become more allowed from legal perspectives. In the US, we've had to track that a lot longer, for example, than say Canada. So in Canada, it's been kind of a relatively new thing to actually track census. So I think we're making strides, but it's a journey, and we got to just keep going down on that journey. At the end of the day, you can have both. You really can, but it is something that we all, as good stewards of programs and just good stewards and employees in general need to carry back to our managers, to our HR teams, and just continue to drive that message home.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move to the next one. How do you balance legacy systems and controls with innovation and new solutions? And this can also just be from many of you.
Wow, that's a toughie.
Even new technology, balancing it with new technology. I mean, so we're going through a VMS replacement right now. We're on our current system. We're about to come off it in the next couple of months for 16 years. It's a very long run. It's a shell of its former self, as you can imagine, with all the Band-Aids we've put on it. Our HCM was upgraded back in 2020. What a great year for an HCM update. And so even reintegrating a new VMS with a new HCM can be challenging, even though all of that data was just looked at. I think it's one of the hardest things that you can do. I think that make sure that if you have experts, have SMEs around you who understand the data, who understand the way the systems talk to each other, who can give you all of that analytics, spend money to have people who understand how you're not going to break everything, is my number one recommendation. And, you know, take the time to find resources who really know what they're talking about. You'll definitely reap the benefit of that in the end. It is one of the most complicated things to do, to try to integrate to large scale pieces of technology to make sure that your business will, you know, business continuity. And there are some really great vendor providers out there who work very hard to you know, do what they need to do to match, and they have great capabilities, but sometimes it's still just a very challenging thing. That was not super optimistic. It's hard, and I want to be candid about that. And if anybody wants to lament about VMS implementations, I'm here for a conversation and a cocktail later.
Therapy, yeah.
Yeah, I think the honesty is definitely appreciated. Another question, if any of you are willing to share roughly the percentage of your program that is over your expected market rate.
I'll defer to you too, because we are not in a tracking mode at this moment.
Well, we track it. We do monitor that, and I will tell you, a very small percentage, I can't give you the exact percentage, is over NTE, and it is something that we track. We use it as a tool, right? When we have a lot of over NTE spend, if we saw a spike in a particular area, location, group, job, we go back and look at it, right? Because sometimes it's tied to, if you have an area that's consistently under and you see high attrition, right? You got to look at the statistics as a whole as an organization, because you may have an organization that's consistently putting people in place that are under NTE to win the business, and they're underpaying the workers, and so you're having a lot of attrition, and you can kind of pick that up by monitoring that as well. When I do my scorecarding, I monitor my suppliers' compliance against NTE rates, for example. That's another way I use that data point, because many times if I have a supplier that's struggling a little bit, they're having a very high interview rate, for example, but they're having a hard time converting those interviews to placements. Many times I'll look over at the next column, which is compliance with market rates, and they'll be way over the compliance rate. Like 100% would be you're within NTE or up to NTE the whole time. And if you're over that number in a higher percentage, it means that, I may have it backwards, so my program team will probably yell at me. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you are going over the NTE rates consistently against your competition who's providing resources that are getting hired at or below, then chances are you're doing something wrong. Maybe it's in your markup as an organization. You need to sharpen your pencil and look at, are we overcharging based on our internal costs and coming up with ridiculously high bill rates against what the competition is, right? Because somebody's filling them. Especially when I do performance scorecarding, I use closed requisitions, things that are not anything in flight, I'm talking about things that have actually resulted in placements to be able to compare. So that's some of the things that I look at. So consistently, we do monitor it from the scorecarding, and we also run variance reports. That's, like I said, it's a great tool. If I start seeing a group that's consistently forcing the program team to go over the NTE, because ultimately in our organization, the hiring leader owns the budget. We're not the rate police. We're merely the rate educators, the rate bartenders. We'll tell you what you should be paying. But at the end of the day, it's your budget and it's between you and your VPs. So that's why we have that kind of reporting. I will say, though, because of that oversight in those reports, we don't have that much consistent over NTE spend. Hopefully that answered the question, and more than happy to talk about it. Reach out to me sometime.
Okay, this next one, thank you, Eric, is a two-part and a little funny. It's been making me smile. So the first part, how do you define a strategic supplier partnership, and what can suppliers do to become more of a strategic partner? And then the last part, love Eric's shirt. Where can we get one?
Told you,
So
Eric, open the
maybe tell
storefront.
us what the shirt says.
Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. I'll figure out a way to make that happen for you. I'll even sign it. No, I'm kidding. That's crazy. I'll just tell you where to get it. But anyway.
So I think the supplier question, right? I mean, it is doing some form of scorecarding. And you know, if you're running with an MSP, they probably are already doing scorecarding, even if they haven't told you they are. But that is usually something they want to share with their QBRs or on their annual business reviews. But you know, to me, it's those things that Eric was just detailing, right? Looking at supplier performance rates, because you don't become a preferred supplier just because you're the friendliest with us, or you send a Christmas card or something else, right? It's got to be based on performance, because you know our programs are there to support the needs of our business. So it's following those rules and guidelines of the program. So whether it's not to exceeds, whether it's the time that it takes to respond to a job that's sent out to your firm. But there's all those sort of things, and I think anybody who's not, if you don't have a VMS, then obviously you can't leverage analytics the right way. But for those of us in large enough companies with a VMS system, there's lots of analytics available. And if anybody out there is a supplier and you're working for, whether it's MSPs or directly working for a corporations program, and you're not getting some kind of a scorecard, you should ask about one, because they're probably keeping one and they're just not sharing the info. Amy, Eric, any other thoughts?
Oh, I've got a couple. If, as a supplier, utilize the data from your side of the equation if you're dealing with VMS-driven accounts. Don't just always depend on the program team or the category team to provide that data and then look surprised at the statistics. You should be tracking that internally and managing your recruiting teams and setting expectations, and really understand the process, right? Because that's the thing. If you're a top-notch supplier and you're doing the job, and the other thing that's really hugely important that is often overlooked, don't be a pain in the tuchus, right? Follow program guidelines. Don't be confrontational with the program teams. Make them your friends. That will help you, because program teams are always stretched very, very thin. And when you're managing on a given day 2,500 contractors and 50 suppliers, and I'm not just talking about sourcing suppliers, but the other demands that get placed on you with suppliers. I mean, there are certain suppliers that, like in our program, we call them warehouse suppliers. They may have been inherited. There's special needs for a certain business that you got to put them, but they're not really in the sourcing mix, but they still have to be maintained for compliance factors and things like that. So be easy to deal with. I mean, don't be tough to deal with. Don't subvert the rules or try and subvert the rules around the program. Just follow the guidelines, and you will be rewarded if the performance is there. And that's the other thing. Make sure, like I've said before, direct sourcing is going to cut the amount of roles that actually make it to the wild, the supply base. And also the roles are going to be more complex, because if it isn't filled by them, they're going to be tougher. So you need to hone your skills and your recruiter skills to be high performing, get candidates fast that are really good candidates, all right? And then present them in a manner that makes sense, meaning good executive summaries when you submit them. And also tie that executive summary. Nothing's worse to me. It's like, I've never been on Tinder, but I've seen those Netflix Tinder things, the Tinder swindler. So I'll use that. Yeah, on Netflix or whatever. So I'll tie it to that. Nothing is worse than, say on that show, when they see somebody's picture and then they scroll over and there's no real meat behind it, and you meet them in person and they don't really resemble the picture or something like that. Same thing here. When you see all these beautiful skills laid out in a summary, and then you go and get the resume finally as a hiring manager, and you go, none of this is in the resume. This is so boring. It's like, wah, wah, it's like next, swipe. Was it left or is it swipe right when you're not? I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I echo that. Don't be a problem. Be compliant, follow the guidelines. If I'm running around playing whack-a-mole and trying to put down the fires, and who do you think I'm going to be hyping up to the managers, and who am I going to be like, please don't make me deal with them anymore, when they're causing me a lot of headaches and a lot of extra work on my team. I fully believe that. We can find strategic partnerships in a lot of places, but the ones that are just constantly creating more work, more stress are the ones that you can't even think about being strategic partners if you're just constantly chasing down messes.
And one last thing. All right, we're in the people business. You're in the people business. We understand that. There's always going to be issues. It's how you respond to the issues that can make you a strategic partner, right? It's not about how the donkey got in the ditch. It's how you get that donkey out and get it back on the road, right? I mean, especially if we bring something to a supplier's attention and we don't have to worry about it anymore. We just know it's going to be fixed and handled. We love that.
You are spot on. Humans are unpredictable, right? But we need to move on and resolve issues, and yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I think we've covered this one, but maybe it's a good one to end on. In all of your predictions about the future of work, what are you most passionate or excited about? So we covered some of those passions before: flexibility, skills, hybrid work. Anything else we mentioned?
When they would let me bring my guitar to the office on those hybrid days, that would be so awesome. That's not going to happen, though, I don't think. But yeah.
To serenade everybody around you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be fun. Concerts daily.
Amy, Alan, any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'm most passionate around getting the business to understand that there's a lot of different ways to have people work for our organization, and they don't have to be FTEs. So whether it's traditional contingent or gig, finding a place in our organization for gig is a really big passion for me. It blends really well, and I want to lay a good, solid technology infrastructure. Getting there, you got to have a good team, and then you can get innovative, and you can start utilizing that top technology, leaning into some AI and some cool new tools to give you access to new talent, and then convince managers, like, you're going to want to get in on this. Like, there's some really good things happening over here. So my passion is just kind of reintroducing the concept of what contingent work actually means.
Yeah, I think it's education, right? It's educating the managers on what our programs can deliver, and also educating them that the workplace today is not the same as it was before the pandemic, and it was already changing a lot before that, right? So they need to understand that, and they're going to be staying around a lot longer when I'm thinking about those older managers out there that have those old-fashioned ways of doing things. So we can't just wait for them to retire. We talked about the graying of the workforce. So we do need to educate, inform, and help change the way they view our programs.
Nice. Well, there are a good handful of questions that we didn't get to, so maybe we can send something out with some more answers and some more insights into a little bit of what we've chatted about today. But again, I just want to thank our panel, first of all, for being here with me today and going through what we want to see or what we hope to see in 2024, and also our audience for listening along and being so engaged. If you want to keep an eye on your inbox for further information, future details like those questions we didn't get to, and just other events that we'll be having in the future, we'd love for you to be a part of it. I appreciate all of your time and all of your insights. Everyone, just stay connected and stay informed, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
everybody.